Good afternoon, everyone. This is Penny from the Wisconsin Land and Water, and I'm the Conservation Training and Membership Services Coordinator. And today we're going to be having the webinar Standards that Address Invasive Species in a Forest. So welcome, everyone. And I'm pleased to welcome Andy Hart today with us. And he's the Wisconsin NRCS State Forester. And I believe Andy is ready to take over. Are you, Andy?
Yep, I'm all set, Penny. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
So I hope everyone can hear me and hope everyone can see their screen. So again, my name is Andy Hart. I'm the NRCS State Forester, and I just kind of wanted to go through it probably won't take the full hour by any means, but just on different ways that NRCS can treat invasive or pest species in a forest setting. I think we all kind of realize that doing a treatment one time is probably not going to be 100% effective by any means. That's not to say in some places that it doesn't work, it doesn't help, it doesn't contain it or anything, but I just wanted to go through the different practices that we offer in forestry and other, it's for pasture as well, but in the forestry setting, some of the different practices that we can use to address invasive species. So those practices are, we can use brush management, site preparation, herbaceous weed control, and forest stand improvement. All of them are available to address invasive species and pest species. So the first one is brush management, and when I think of brush management, I kind of think a lot of buckthorn. So what is brush management? Basically, it's the management or removal of woody, non-herbaceous, or succulent plants, including those which are invasive and noxious. So if you look in our cookbook, for those outside of NRCS, you can find the 2017 cookbook on the NRCS homepage, the EFOTG website, and that will give you the payment scenarios of the things that that NRCS would pay for. And basically all the scenarios here are addressed for that, and it really depends on the density of the infestation and the size of the infestation. And lastly, it depends on if you're using mechanical or chemical or a combination of both. But I can just read through the scenarios real quick. There's mechanical for small shrubs. There's mechanical and chemical small shrubs, mechanical and chemical large shrubs, and chemical individual plant treatment. If you notice, the last one that I read is D, and that's treating light infestations on pastures with mechanical or chemical methods. So in fact, this one probably would be used the least in a forestry setting, if at all, maybe on the edge or in a planting. If it's followed by site preparation and a planting practice, this may be considered a supporting practice to planting and have the same resource concern. So you could use site prep, then you could do planting, and then you could do brush management afterwards, and it would be considered a supportive practice. And the resource concern would be the pest control, invasive species and pest control. The next practice that you can use for controlling invasives is site preparation. Basically, site preparation it can be two things. It can be controlling the competition, woody vegetation, invasive plant vegetation, competing grasses, as well as stirring up the soil or disking or anything like that. Because it's usually a two-pronged attack depending on where you are at in your forest. If it's a lot of open and there's a lot of grasses, you're going to be needing to do a lot of competition control as well as stirring up the soil. The site preparation, the definition is basically treating areas to improve site conditions for establishing trees and or shrubs. The cookbook scenarios you would be using is scenario C and D. And again, brush management can be used as a separate practice to ensure basically that the seedlings will take place and have success, and the supporting practice to be a supporting practice to 612, which is species and composition is the resource concern typically. The implications of these two practices is that when you look at it, you have to sort of look at these in sort of in time. So it could be that in the first year you do brush management to eliminate the brush, and the next year you go in and before you plant you respray using site preparation to eliminate any of the re-emerging brush that's coming about. So in fact, so you're looking at a sort of a bundle of first brush management, then site prep, then planting, and then it would be the producer's responsibility to follow through with the O&M on those practices. The next one is fairly obvious and is more dealing with plant materials. So it's herbaceous weed control. It's the removal or control of herbaceous weeds, including invasive, noxious, and prohibited plants. This cannot be used after planting, after 6/12. Unfortunately, it is considered part of the O&M, and it is the producer's responsibility to follow through with the maintenance. And I believe for that herbaceous weed control, it would be for 5 years. So they would be responsible for following up with 5 years after planting. All of the scenarios would fit for that, the payment scenarios. There's mechanical hand, there's mechanical, and then there's chemical spot treatments. So that's another practice that we can use when we're looking at invasive and noxious weeds in the forest. The next one is a little more interesting because it's forest stand improvement, and this is the manipulation of species composition, stand structure, and stocking by cutting or killing selected trees and understory vegetation. You can use scenario A, B, or C for this. Those scenarios being pre-commercial thinning hand tools. Why? Because you could actually be treating both if your buckthorn is large enough and is basically similar size to the trees that you're going to be thinning for competition control, and the same equipment would be used for those, then those would typically be done concurrently. That's one way. There's also just competition control, and it just depends on the type of equipment, mechanical and light, as well as you could use creating patch clear cuts to eliminate. And if you have a small area that fits the definition of what a patch clear cut is, if you have in one area, you could use that first to basically clear cut the area, and then follow through with different treatments after for re-emerging. So the common theme for a lot of this is I don't think the idea that you're going to eliminate these things is probably highly unlikely. And what we're trying to do is control it enough, or to hold it in one place, to have, at least from forestry, is to allow the regeneration to get past the invasives or the pest species that you're talking about. And it's hard to talk about all this stuff when there's so many different types, because I have buckthorn and garlic mustard in my mind. Here in the picture, we have a bad picture of ironwood, which is something that can be treated during a thinning. You may run into a case where it's a clear cut and they want to take, you can scratch that. Let me just go on to the next point here. The woody plants can be removed with normal thinning depending on diameter of woody plants and equipment used for thinning. Now it gets kind of tough because in a place where you have thinning for pulp market, a lot of these species cannot be used for pulp. Like, I don't think buckthorn is used in pulp. So you may have to, rather than do it concurrently, because it's too hard to figure for us to know as resource managers, to know exactly where the material is going after. It may be that you just contract it in a separate year, where you come in to do the competition control, and they do their thinning, their normal thinning that they would do, and maybe it's a pulp product, maybe it's not, and then to reevaluate the following year to see, well, when they thinned it, did they get rid of all the buckthorn? Did they get rid of all the ironwood? Or to come back and spray re-emerging plants and pests. So some of the implications for that is that you can use competition control year one followed by brush management for reemergence. Again, that's a common theme for a lot of these is you're hitting it one time very hard, and then the next time you're trying to get anything that reemerges. Like I said, I don't think you're going to get it to the point where you're going to be able to 100% eradicate it. I'm sure there's cases where it's happened, but I think we need to talk to the producer that this is a long-term commitment, and they have to be willing to be vested in that to make it worth their time and to do what they're actually trying to do and control the resource concern. So I have a little warning here. If, again, I was kind of repeating what I was saying a little bit ago, if forest stand improvement and brush management could be done with the same equipment at the same time because it's the same machinery, NRCS would cost share only one of these practices the first year, and we would need to reevaluate. What we don't want to get into the habit of is paying for something twice when it could be done with the same cost sharing amount in the first place. We have a lot of requests to do things like that, to do with thinning and to do brush management at the same time, when really it's going to be done with the same, say, Fecon machine at the same time. So I'm not saying that in every case that's prohibited, but it's just a warning for you to think about what are they doing, where's the size of the trees at, because if they're doing a thinning, a late stage thinning, and it's merchantable timber that they're thinning, and they're also brush managing and using a Fecon machine, those are two different entries and two different pieces of equipment. So those, we would be able to consider funding both of those practices to deal with the issue. But if in fact it's at a smaller diameter, trees that are going to be thin and they're about the same size as what you have for the example buckthorn, then they would be handled they could be thinned at the same time. Here are just a couple other things to consider for herbaceous weed control and brush management. One of the things is in a forestry setting, it must have a forest management plan. Another thing to consider is something we've talked about, and I think everybody as managing land probably has this kind of figured out, that eradication is often difficult, costly, and time-consuming. You have to look at some of the lifespans of these practices. Forest stand improvements, 10 years. Brush management is 10 years. Site prep is 1 year, but herbaceous weed control is 5 years. So there's quite a commitment, and sometimes when we're saying that we're going from, we have a 70% infestation, we want it to bring it to zero. I think you might want to maybe reconsider that zero, because it's probably highly unlikely. You're going to have a better chance of success, though, if you look at some of these practices in combination with each other. Again, the combination with brush management, site prep, and planting is a really easy one to look at. Another thing to consider is you have to consider if the competing vegetation is inhibiting the owner's objectives. Because, for example, in the Marshfield training, we were at a pine plantation which had a highly dense thicket of buckthorn underneath. But really the question came when talking with everybody out in the field, talking with the DNR foresters. I mean, was that really inhibiting the landowner's objectives if it was to be just growing pine in rotation and basically for economic reasons? In that case, you may want to consider talking a landowner out of doing something like that, or at least wait until it's time to regenerate the stand. And in that case of that forest, it's probably 30 years from now, 15, 30 years from now, they do a thinning and then another thinning, and then maybe it's worth attacking. I mean, the landowner may have a reason to do it for wildlife, or may want to plant other shrubs underneath. There's always a what if, but I think in general you got to consider, is this actually a problem for the forest in and of itself? And although you're losing some ground species with these invasives, even by removing them, they're still most likely going to outcompete them. So that's just something to consider when you're looking at herbaceous weed control or brush management. TSPs and planners need to determine by resource concern which practices could be combined. And what I'm trying to get across in this perspective is that if you say that your resource concern for brush management is 100% eradication of a buckthorn invasive or invasive, another invasive tree shrub species, and you're going to use another practice like competition control, and you're citing specifically the fact that the resource concern is pest pressure, plant and pest pressure, then I don't think that would work really well with those resource concerns. You can sort of double up when you're looking at another resource concern by default doing competition control. With forest stand improvement, you could end up taking out buckthorn, and then you could come back and use brush management specifically to get the re-emerging buckthorn that's coming up. Again, this is a really hard conversation to have when you're talking about 40 or 50 different types of invasives and noxious weeds and pests. Again, we talked about this already. It's you got to look at the lifespan, and you got to let the landowner know that it's their responsibility. I'm sure we all do, including the operation and maintenance. Like I said, a lot of these are for a lot of years, and it's a big time investment. And then lastly, will these practices help achieve the landowner goals? So like I said, it's kind of a short, it's a short presentation. What I'm trying to do is just sort of cover some of the things that you can use to combine. My goal is to be able to look at these and be able to use two different practices to try to achieve the same thing. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to type in, that would be great. And with that, I'm going to kind of go to the last page, which is there is a solution. So what I've been doing since I've been here is sort of putting together a puzzle of trying to, assist a landowner without wasting money on controlling, shrubs and invasives and unwanted plants. And it's been quite a puzzle. And what I've been doing is sort of putting together things that you could use to do it, but you're sort of doing it indirectly and not as straightforward. And what NRCS is going to be offering, not for this sign up, but for the next sign up, is we're going to be offering brush management and herbaceous weed control, where you can use the same practice multiple years, up to 3 years, and so that you could hit the species the first year, the second year hit the re-emerging, and then the following year hit it again. Again, I don't know if we're really going to be able to eradicate a lot of this stuff. I think maybe up north where it's less prevalent, you might be able to hold it back and a lot longer in time, which I think is great, and I think is worth putting our time and money into. And I think that this stuff is going to be very helpful when you're trying to do regeneration of trees and shrubs. This will help you establish them, get them past the invasives. And that's kind of where I'm seeing the benefit of these types of things. So really, if it's kind of a lot, it's mixing 4 different practices, and I went through all the different ins and outs of the practices to make sure that they could be in combination. So with that, I don't see any questions on here. But so it's kind of short and sweet, but that's kind of what we have. And I get a lot of questions on this and on how you can combine some of these practices. So I just thought I'd kind of throw these together, put them out there, and that's basically what I've got. And you can feel free to, on the next slide, you can feel free if you do have a question and you want to raise it somewhere else, just let me know. Or if you're in a situation where you're talking to a landowner and you want some help with that, just give me a call and we can kind of walk through what we can do to best help the landowner achieve his goals. And that's all I have.